Well, hello there, and welcome to the podcast, to another episode of Queerly Overthinking. I'm your host, Adam Harper. I am so beyond thrilled today for the guest of today's episode. Elena Kayak is here with us today, and I have known Elena all the way back since 2006 when I was just a young little sixth grader in middle school. And I am just so beyond elated to have her here today on the podcast to be able to share about our journey together over these last several years and the friendship that we've built and cultivated. And I'm just, I could go on and on and on. I'm sure I'm going to be going on and on about how much I adore her. But Elena, thank you so much for being here. Welcome to the podcast.
I wish every single one of my former students felt the same way as you do. That isn't true, but I like to think that they believe they gained a lot of growth and insight and, had a good education while they were in the class with me. So I appreciate that, Adam.
Well, it's truly my pleasure to know you, and so just grateful for everything that you shared with us as a mentor, teacher, friend, and I just truly, appreciate those formative years, especially as a young person figuring out where do they want to go in life, what do they want to pursue, both career-wise, passion-wise, and I love how much you supported a wide range of teachings and experiences and knowledge, like all of it.
You know, I was in education for 38 years. I think the thing I learned as a teacher mostly is that I was learning every day from my students, every single day. There wasn't a day that went by that they did not impart some insight to me, profound and otherwise, ordinary, and just it was a delightful time to be a privilege, really, to be with students and help, shape their vision of themselves and what they might like to pursue intellectually and otherwise. So, yeah, I was very lucky.
Well, for our listeners, I would love to be able to have them know a little bit more about you. Like, who is Elena Kayak and what makes her so special?
Oh, wow. Oh, my goodness. I'll keep it under 25 words or less. I was really, really lucky to be born into a family of educators. My aunt, Nina, and my mother, Marie Jo, were both teachers, and then they became administrators throughout their career. And I loved, as a child, following their footsteps into schools, the light of the school, the floors, the smells, this was in New York City. I grew up in New York City, and they were both educators in the New York City Board of Education, which I ended up doing at one point. Did not actually see myself going into education. I was a political science and philosophy major at Queens College at the City University of New York, and thought I'd take a different path, and went to law school for a very brief time. But eventually I went to grad school for education for at-risk, with a specialty in at-risk students. I started teaching in 1983 in a program that was just about the very best possible way to enter the education system. It was a fairly new, maybe it was in its second year, and it was the pilot program to introduce preschoolers to the New York City system in the public schools. And they were inviting 4-year-olds, and the teacher, the lucky teacher, that was me, had a very well-funded classroom with marvelous equipment, toys, playthings, wooden blocks, all those colorful and stimulating things for young children. At the time, I had a paraprofessional who was an equal to me, and became a wonderful teacher in her own right, and we were a great pair. And that was the first year I got a taste of what it was like to be in a classroom. And then about 3 years later, I was plucked out of the elementary school to try my hand at middle school teaching. I was a middle school teacher for the rest of my career, on and off with teaching young children. So at many different points throughout my career, I would teach preschoolers during the regular academic year and then middle schoolers during the summer, or sometimes it would be reversed. But I always liked to teach children who didn't understand the written word and couldn't read, and then be able to teach kids who were actually reading wonderful texts and have that kind of experience. So it was a wonderful balance. And then eventually I became an administrator of sustainability programs in two different school districts in New Mexico. And alongside that, it's actually started in New York. I was grant writing the whole time to better fund programs within my schools or districts and get kids really learning outside to whatever degree they could, whether it was through bicycle riding or through environmental projects of some kind. And that's not 25 words or less, Adam. I totally exceeded that. Okay. That's it in a nutshell.
I sincerely appreciate that so, so much. And what an amazing career and what an impact. I know, like, I'm truly honored to have been, one of the many who have been impacted by all of the efforts that you've accomplished and every initiative that you've worked through. And it's amazing to see just that arc, too, of just where it began and where you are now. And correct me if I'm wrong, I think you had just written a grant recently about related to like cycling and
Yes.
how's that going?
The community building that's going on at a South Valley school in Albuquerque is happening regardless if the grant is awarded or not, but we'll probably find out this month. It's called an Outdoor Equity Fund grant, and it helps get children who live in underserved areas of the state to be introduced to the outside through myriad programs. It could be bird watching, it could be actual social media posting on trees and the river and the state of the river. It's really a wide open book. Now, this is the third grant I've written for different nonprofits since my retirement to try to get kids outdoors for learning more. So that's to answer your question specifically. Grant writing, I saw it. In fact, you were the beneficiary, your class in 2006, of a grant that I had received to start a school newspaper. And I just felt like that was kind of a lost art. It seems like, why wait till high school to have a newspaper? Let's do this in middle school, because you guys were certainly talented enough and you pulled it off.
Oh my goodness. You are so right. The minute you said it, I was just like, oh my gosh, we did write a grant and we did get funding. And that provided us with materials and hardware like USBs and cameras, point and shoot. I mean, this was like high tech for us back in 2006, 2007.
Yes.
But it allowed us to creatively explore that. And actually, for our viewers here, I have some actual copies of the newspaper that we did in our middle school. It is chock full of illustrations and stories and puzzles, and honestly, it was just so much fun to be able to do this together. We call it the Monthly Eagle because it came out once a month, and the eagle was our school mascot. But I remember how much joy this brought me to be able to compile so many different stories and artwork and things together. This actually, I'd mentioned this previously to Elena before we started recording. This was really a turning point for me, I think, just career-wise and inspirational-wise of, I love being able to create and lay things out and organize and design. And so it was all the way back then. I was
Yeah.
priming myself for it and getting ready for it, and I loved it.
What you're describing is so true of so many students that they have a bent or they have learned about, and I don't want to say career, like the idea isn't, I know we're all about career fairs and career building but really guiding students to something they enjoy doing and that they have a facility for. And young middle school students have a great deal of talent, and they need a place to find their voice. And a newspaper is one of those voice finding places. And it seems almost antiquated to talk about newspapers because so many of them are closing now. And journalism and journalists are under fire for so many aspects of the work they do day in and day out. And I have this fantasy that Mackenzie Scott is going to wrench the ownership of the Washington Post away from her ex-husband and like rehire all the photojournalists and all the people that he laid low. It's just a fantasy, but boy, journalism is still so important. And you could say that journalism has just shifted, but it's been diminished besides just shifting in this day and age.
And you bring up such a great point too about the written word and ways for people to express themselves and for opinions and thoughts to be compiled together. And that reminded me of how much I appreciate the experiences of going to museums or art galleries or different cultural events, especially at such a young age too. That really instilled in me a desire to learn about other experiences outside of my own upbringing, outside of my own beliefs, outside of my own culture, and to be able to appreciate that and to also see how there's forms of beauty, there's forms of resistance, there's forms of advocacy in a wide range of not just the written word in newspapers and publications, but in visual and how that can be interpreted. So I so appreciate how you were so instrumental like introducing that, and I remember all the beautiful museums and how exciting it was to be able to go and just see these giant canvases on the wall and just kind of like sit with it. And what does it make you feel? What does it make you think? How does it provoke you in some way?
Those were some of my they are some of my fondest memories of teaching were the field study trips that we took to see art or to see nature or to see mosaics or the river. I mean, just having students learning outside, and not being hemmed in by those four walls and also not being connected to any kind of technology. So I was kind of lucky. I got to teach in this golden time where we weren't all tethered, and I include myself in that, tethered to our smartphones. And I think I know I'm not alone. There's a movement abreast here afoot with trying to figure out how to go on media diets and phone diets. And I applaud those efforts because these phones are thieves of they're intermediaries they kind of break our firsthand experience of whether it's art or being outside. Just they're distractions, and I'm highly distractible. So I'm kind of well aware of my need to restrict, and not in a punitive way, but just in a like a replacement therapy sort of way. If you have a habit that you want to break, you need to replace it that's with something that you enjoy doing as well, right? So I don't mean it to sound punitive, but I know, there's a lot of school districts throughout the country that are limiting or just banning phones in the classroom, and with good reason. Just try teaching a class. And I finished my last classroom experience was 2017, 2018. The phones were a challenge then, and they're becoming a true intrusion in the like authentic, genuine, real time interaction between students and teachers.
You bring up such a great point of this age before all this happened, and it is wild to think how much has changed in the last several years, and specifically around education and those experiences. Because I really do appreciate too that growing up in New Mexico and having a lot of the shared experiences we did in New Mexico, there's so much to experience there, so much culture, so many rich environments. And I am grateful also. I will echo what you said of technology not being as prevalent as it is today, especially in the education world. And I also am finding ways to try to limit my screen time, especially on apps that are meant to pull you in and to suck you in, because it's just like, what am I doing, with my day? And try to like get outside, enjoy the sunshine and, everything.
Very important. And I feel like, children are not, they've already had these studies where they say that these 3-year-olds or 4-year-olds have 10,000 vocabulary words fewer at a certain age than they did, 10 years ago, because their parents are in a way tethered. And I dodged that. I was able to raise 3 children, and I didn't raise students, but thousands of students over that period of year that I interacted with and got to be, genuinely in their space, real time. And I'm not trying to paint this like bucolic, picture of there are always going to be challenges, right, with teaching and learning in the classroom, and the least of which is your fluorescent lighting that students are subjected to. And I'm sure at some point they're going to find that, kids have to be in spaces that have exposure to natural light. They've already found this out. And of course, lead schools are attending to those necessities. But still, even in lead schools, like the windows aren't operational. You can't open the windows to get cross ventilation. So in terms of learning styles and optimal spaces for students to learn, we have a bit of a way to go. I just hope that students, here we are with AI. I'm thinking of what it would be like to sponsor a newspaper in a middle school right now, when students could write an article by plugging in a sentence to, chat, and then it writes the article for the student. Just the challenge that the teacher has in finding that authentic voice of the student. I think we're kind of like giving over our voices to some degree to this very powerful algorithm. It's very important to remain clear and clear-headed and keep your vision kind of intact amidst all of this very, very rapid change.
Well, Elena, I literally am having the best time on this podcast episode right now with you.
Me too. First podcast, very excited.
Truly, I'm so honored. Oh my gosh.
Likewise.
Well, moving along in our kind of outline that we've pulled together, I wanted to touch on something very poignant, actually. When we were discussing what we wanted to talk about, it really stood out to me, and it also like kind of hit me like very emotionally in a good way, of just how just in tune you are as an individual, especially with being an educator and working with kids and with children. And to give a little bit more context here, so 2006, I was in 6th grade, and I was a young kid who I grew up very kind of Orthodox faith of the Mormon religion, or the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And when I say Orthodox, I really do mean like it was very by the book sometimes, and it was very, I want to say heavy-handed, of just, these are the rules and we live by the book, we live by the rules. And I did not have the vocabulary to really understand my developing identity, that I was starting to slowly understand, like, maybe what am I interested in? What am I not interested in? I was not interested in hanging out with the bros during lunch and talking about girls inappropriately, or being all like macho. I
Yeah.
actually I put this in the outline so I didn't forget it. 20 years ago is when Hannah Montana first appeared on Disney Channel, and I was absolutely obsessed. I even wrote an article about it in our school newspaper.
Great.
And it was a way for me to try to reclaim what I think I felt like people were coming at me for, or like not necessarily persecuting, but more so just like bullying, I would say. Of just, oh, you're
Absolutely.
right, like
Absolutely.
you're queer, you're a sissy, like things like that. And it's fascinating to me that I did not know that I was queer, that I didn't know that I was gay, because I didn't have that. But with all that in mind, I'm going to pause there for a second and just ask, what was your experience in learning how to be in tune and learning how to
Mm.
be aware? Yeah, I'm going to pause there. Like, how did you learn to be in tune and aware, especially with young developing children?
I switched from a parochial school to a public school when I was in the sixth grade. And wow, what a eye-opening experience that was, because I would write JMJ and a crucifix on top of every piece of loose leaf that I was working on, whether I was handing it in or it was my own work. And it stood for Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, and it had the crucifix. And I was taught to do that because it blessed your work, okay, in my parochial school. I was bullied in that new to me public school, and realized just how that dynamic works. And as I was truly, educated about teaching, and I had some really marvelous, exceptional mentors in undergraduate and graduate school. It brought that more to light, that dynamic of male, female, boss, underling, employer, employee, and how those relationships work or don't work. I tried as a teacher, and I couldn't always do it, but I was able to do it in very many schools that I was teaching at, by asking for certain types of duties. Now, I am one of those people that don't do well in a cafeteria setting. Didn't as a child, didn't as an adult. The sounds, the open plenum, the reverberations, the poor acoustics generally, they would not work well with my personality and my hard wiring. And I would request of my administrators to have a space like my classroom. And my classroom became the safe space in almost every school I worked in for students who were like me, actually, who maybe had been bullied or picked on or weren't thriving in that environment and needed to be in a quieter, more comfortable. And I'm not talking about a safe space, like trigger words, and that idea has evolved, right, over the years. And now I believe even in colleges and universities there are places that students can go to if they're triggered by a certain topic in a lecture hall, for example. And it's not that I'm against that idea, it's just that the real world is triggering in so many ways. And we need to learn how to cope with those things. But I think sixth graders, wow, they're so young and so much going on. And the other thing was, puberty is coming, and that's changing your brain, truly, physically, changing you physically. And there are a lot of challenges for middle school students. And that's why I loved teaching at the middle school level, because kids are not certainly adults yet. They don't have those responsibilities. They're just becoming themselves. And yet they don't have those inhibitions either that high school kids might have. They don't check themselves. They're more free. They're more childlike, if you will. I was able to do that in your school, your middle school, and pretty much every middle school before and afterwards, I could invite students into my classroom, so they could have a place to be more themselves and not feel challenged by other students, or, and I don't want to say persecuted per se, but it certainly does feel that way when you're a sixth grader, that, people are just relentless. Kids can be hard and harsh. I love that my classroom was looked to and used by students, to come and get a respite from that. And you know what, Adam, they didn't always stay. We had students come in and out, and sometimes one week they needed to be there, and other weeks they were back in the cafeteria or outside. So it was a very fluid thing, and it was never designated. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely, absolutely. And thank you so much for going into depth with that, because the pattern that I'm seeing here is just, it sounds like there was like a need internally. And then as you were able to create those experiences for yourself, you wanted to broaden that so that way others could also benefit from that. So that way they could potentially learn how to, as you said, cope, how to navigate like a life that is always full of triggers, and hopefully they can then expand their spaces and maybe include other people. It's kind of like just this continual progression of that. And I have to say, I loved coming to your classroom every time, just because it was a very like quiet, calm place. I could focus on either project work or homework or have lunch there. I really appreciate how much intentionality that you put into it, and to see where it kind of like started from, and truly like intuitive and just aware, like are all these words that I would describe of you saw the need not only in yourself but then in others, and you just shared that so freely.
Well, I think that, again, when I say I was doing it for kids, I think that by having that classroom and being that space over the years, that I was healing myself as well. And certainly I love the company of students informally, because when you're in a classroom, there's very much, here's the curriculum, we got to cover this stuff, you have a presentation, I'm grading you. There's a lot of formality and structure, and there should be expectations that the students have coming into the room about how they're going to spend their time there and what they'll gain. I always wanted students to feel like they were gaining something by being in the same space as I was. And I'm not talking about anything profound necessarily, but in that last year that I was teaching, I had baby chicks. It was springtime, and I had a dozen at one time. And I had the toughest kids, in black leather, coming into this lunchroom class just to hang out with baby chicks. And I just really love that memory of these kids who were just so rough and tumble, just softening and hanging out, and no grading, no expectations, just a special space for them to have another side of themselves show, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I truly appreciate how you individualized each experience as much as you could, so that way each student felt like they were able to glean something from it. And despite the curriculum and the regimen that can come from academia, I truly appreciate it so much as a young child, because looping back to a couple things that you had said about healing one's inner child, or like connecting with one's inner child, especially as we are like our own parents, like we like parent our inner selves. I have done a lot of that recently, and I think even this podcast too is a way to do that, to be able to tap into things and to talk about things, to be able to work through and discuss and overthink. It doesn't always have to have an answer, but I always tend to overthink things. I remember when we were planning out this episode, and you had shared with me that, as you were tailoring each experience and working with students and such, that especially as we were developing our identities and our like who we were, like figuring out like where we were going in our lives. It was fascinating to me that you had mentioned that you saw the signs that I might be a little a little on the queer side of things, and that was news to me, honestly, because I had no idea, especially with everything that was going on, especially like what you said with kids being kids, and it feels like it's your whole world, and so it could feel so just so many like external stimuli and emotions running high and hormones and growth and everything that you were saying. So it definitely was surprising to me to hear that there were already signs there that I wasn't aware of, but you were just very in tune with it, and I appreciate that knowledge share.
I'm glad. And any teacher who's been in the classroom for, doesn't take very long. And remember, I mentioned that I was a preschool teacher as well. There are signs for 3 and 4-year-old children that they are leaning in that direction. And you are, their mentor, you are their guide. And just providing that safe space to be yourself, like that, to me, that was like one of my parents, from a preschool program that I taught in here in New Mexico, gave me the finest compliment, was that I let his children be themselves, that. And I just, that I wasn't imposing, and that's really important, is that everyone, boy, I feel like, that my inner Mr. Rogers is shining through right now, because my mother didn't permit us to watch television very much, and what she did let us watch was Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. And to this day, you're special just by being you. What better, message can you give a student than, and it's true. I mean, I think over the years and all the unique personalities I got to engage with over that time, and many of them were struggling with their sexual identity. Some of them weren't, because they, as you, were not even aware. Like, that wasn't part of their script. It wasn't part of their family life. Maybe they didn't have a person in their family to look to or to talk to. And that's why, and I'm plugging this documentary pretty hard, these, because I just saw it last week. The Librarians is out, and it's on PBS. You can get it on YouTube. It's a PBS independent lens film, and it talks about students having access to stories and seeing themselves in those stories, and how important and valuable it is for those persons to relate to somebody else going through the same struggles and challenges. And The Librarians is a documentary that explores what's happening in this time of banning books and restricting what, formative minds are exposed to in a very detrimental way, and we all can point to those books. And I think maybe you discussed them on a previous podcast about the books you've read and the ones that have had the most impact. I often think of wow, when I read something now, I just finished a Pulitzer Prize winning book from several years ago called The Brief and Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde. It's a challenging book because it's written like half in Spanglish and Dominican Republic and English, and I'm constantly looking up things. But I just finished it, and I was like, wow, I wish before I like really started teaching middle school, I had that book. In New York City, when I was teaching, many of my students were bilingual Spanish. In Queens, we had the largest population of Ecuadorians outside Ecuador, the largest population of Colombians outside of Colombia, the largest population of Guatemalans outside of Guatemala. That sort of neighborhood enclave-ish, that was Queens, very diverse, exciting in that way. But I didn't have myself as a teacher the script to, attend to their needs as much as I would have liked. I'd like to do a shout out to the Sophia Center, who introduced me to the writing of bell hooks. and introduced me to a lot of gender issues in schools and how we treat girls versus boys. And it woke me up as a veteran teacher. Okay, I had spent many years in the classroom, and this Sophia Center here in Albuquerque was a great resource for professional development in how you treat students, girls, boys, gender, queer, gay, everything, the rainbow. And very grateful to them for the curriculum they provided to teachers.
Everything you've said, I've resonated so much with, and it's so fascinating too to hear just your experience in the New York demographics as well, and just to see just how everything has all the little connecting points between all of that. And what really stood out to me was what you mentioned about like having the literary, the vocabulary, the understanding, and kind of wishing to have that earlier in advance. You're correct. A previous episode, I did share some books that I had recently read, and I thank you for sharing the book that you had recently read and the documentary too. I'm definitely going to put that on my watch list. I feel like a lot of the books that I've read, I don't know if I shared or not already, but a lot of them are romance, like cute romance, like, you know, keeping everything PG, and then some spicy romance because that's my guilty pleasure. And then the third category was queer stories beyond romance, so it was more like historical fiction and just understanding a little bit more of the queer community and the history of it, and just different stories intermingled with that, and how instrumental that would have been to even just see
Yes.
like representation at such a young age. And I get that there are people who have, like, you know, on both sides of, you know, what content is quote unquote appropriate depending on like what is shared. I understand that there is some gray that people need to navigate within that, but
Sure.
for me, I feel like it really would. I felt like early on, I can't remember which episode it was, but I did share like when I was coming out and how I was processing all of it, because I was actually finally figuring it out like mid-college, like early college. And I literally felt so alone. Like I did not know what was going on. I was like, what the heck? I really feel like if I had access to content that represented, you know, what I was feeling and understanding, it would have been a completely different story. Granted, though, I am grateful for how things have just played out now, because, you know, I feel like that's what everybody always says of like, oh, I wouldn't change a thing just because I wouldn't be who I am. Well, you know, I agree with that. And also it would have been nice to have some context.
No question. No question. Right. You can't go back and change those formative times and the difficulties. That's, you know, like you always wish, oh, I wish I hadn't had to go through something, whatever that difficulty was. But I read that was another quote I thought of, and I don't remember who said it. Like the obstacles are not diverting you from your path, they are your path. I'm paraphrasing. I don't know who said it. I can't bring to mind, but and I'm not true to the actual statement, but you know, that's what forms us, and those difficulties, you know, help us get better, be better, do better. Yeah, you just certainly, you know, look back and wish it might have been easier here or there, right? And whatever those challenges or difficulties were.
Before we jump back in, a quick shout out to our executive overthinkers over on Patreon. Our very first member is Scott. Thank you so much for supporting the show. It truly means so much. And if you want to be included in future episode shoutouts, check out Queerly Overthinking on Patreon. And now, back to the show. Elena, I cannot begin to explain how much I've been enjoying this conversation, and truly thank you for your time today.
Thank you for having me here to talk. And I'm just enjoying seeing you as an adult and asking these deep questions.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. With this last little section to round us off here, I am just so curious to know, with everything that we've talked about, as we round the corner into, you know, the mid 2020s already, we're already full speed ahead of 2026. What is just at top of mind right now, both for you in life and in career and passion projects and I know you mentioned some previous continued professional development and working with grants and such, but what's at top of mind for you right now?
I think to whatever degree I can contribute in a nonpartisan way. Now, remember, I told you I was a political science major, right? I always thought that, public service was in my future. And in a way, teaching was that, right? It wasn't an elected position. One of the things that Richard and I are involved in this, we're going into our third year of being camp hosts at different state parks in Washington. We love the work. People who come to camp or to visit a park, to hike, to ride horses, to bicycle, you never talk about politics. You're talking about the weather and the trail and directions and the lake burying one of the trails that doesn't exist anymore but is still on the map. You're engaging with the public and you're providing a service and it's educational, but there's no grading and there's no politics. And we love that work. We love the ability to contribute in this way that has nothing to do with formal education and has nothing to do with politics. And I feel like that's a really good space for us to be in right now. And Richard and I both share this mutually, and we spell each other, and sometimes we work together, and sometimes give each other space. It's just a really good place to be in now. And I've already spent some time really just immersed in the Sonoran Desert. I got to work at Saguaro National Park as a VIP, they call us, a volunteer in parks, both at the visitor center, orienting folks to having the very best optimal time in the park, to roving the trails, which was a favorite activity during that spell. And then last year, that was in 24, and last year Richard and I worked at Bosque del Apache National Wildlife Refuge. I was their grant researcher, and again, just working behind the scenes and getting things stronger, healthier, better without fanfare or being out in the open, just working behind the scenes. Certainly in the visitor center, you're public facing, so that's a little bit different. But I will tell you, and this has been a long time aspiration of mine, to be an seasonal interpretive park ranger at the Grand Canyon South Rim. And I would love to. So I'm still aspiring to that. I feel like every park or refuge visitor center I work at, I'm getting a little bit closer to that goal and I'm building my park resume to do that work because I love the Grand Canyon. It's very close to where we live here. It's iconic. It's exquisite. It's an exquisite space. And, my son said, you're in a Grand Canyon rut because there was a series of years before COVID that I went to the Grand Canyon like every year or two and hiked down to the bottom and back up with different people, different folks, like 9 different trips with exchange students, with friends of my children, with my children themselves. Just loved every single one of those hikes. And, a very small fraction of the people who visit the Grand Canyon actually step foot below the South Rim. Very tiny fraction. And there's so much to see there and so much to experience. And if you want to go, it's not about really, finding this gorgeous space. It's really about finding yourself. They say that, all the memes and the reels, I went to this space not to find the beautiful Lake Crescent, but to find myself at Lake Crescent. That's the thing. It's just being outside. So that's what's in store, I hope, for the next few years. I'll continue to grant write when asked and when I feel I can do a good job for a nonprofit that is getting students outside. I will continue that work, but I really would love to continue to be, or I call us bogus rangers because that's not our training. We're both academic. We're educators, Richard and I, and it's going to be fun segueing into this new role for both of us.
Oh my gosh, I loved all of that so much. And honestly, that is such an intriguing factoid about the how many people have actually gone down below the South Rim, like you said. Like that is
I don't even mean
fascinating.
down to the bottom. I don't mean to the bottom. I don't mean the 10 miles. I mean even below. Like they just kind of peek over and, take some pictures and selfies and whatever. I'm talking about like just spending some time there, not making it a stop on a longer trip, right? And
Mm.
and the Grand Canyon is just a joy to behold and to be in and all the rest. So I'd love, we could take a trip down there. You figure out how to do that.
Honestly, I'm so down. As long as I pack plenty of sunscreen, I'm totally down.
Yes.
Yeah, let me know next time you're planning on it, because then I would be happy to see how I can finagle that. I genuinely appreciated how much you described that despite a change in the day to day, what remains is a desire to keep change moving, to keep it evolving, to evolve environments to make them better, to keep them inclusive and more inclusive. And I feel like that is so core to like who and what you are and what you're doing and what's your passion and driving you. And I admire that so much about you, and I just see that in everything that you've described. And I feel so fortunate to be able to see that and be able to witness that, but then also excited for the people who also get to experience what you've done and to experience the impact that you've made in each of these environments. So truly, you are an incredible human being, Elena.
So, Adam, think about what you're doing right now with this podcast. Think about what it serves, both for you and the larger public, right? You are doing the same exact thing. You are. Think about it. It's not, out in the woods. Okay. Although I do in your future see an outdoor podcast somehow, that can happen. And I just appreciate you, continuing to push the envelope a little bit and getting your voice heard and getting the voices of this whole queerly overthinking. I just love the title of the podcast. It's just so right on the money. It is just so bullseye. We do our small things and we just hope that they will have the impact we intend them to have, and that our voices and the goals of just being out in sunlight. And I know in your case we have this particular challenge with sunlight, right, that you are working through right now. And your resiliency and your ability to just keep moving and push the envelope and always getting better, always improving, always looking, the undying curiosity that you have. It's just, you're making me feel like I want to contact every single student I ever taught and tell them to start a podcast, with like, and then have like some kind of cross connecting of all these podcasts. I know very little about podcasts. That's one of the kind of places I need to move into. I don't know kind of how they work, or who listens to them and what kind of I know nothing. And so you introducing me to this format and even to this program and everything about it has been an educational experience for me. So thank you.
Oh my goodness, Elena, literally, I'm trying so hard to like keep it all together, because I literally just thank you so much for saying that. And truly, it's such a privilege and a pleasure, and being able to do this, to have the ability to do this. And I feel like maybe you feel similarly about knowing that you have certain skill sets and knowing that you can impact not only your circle, but maybe some other social circles around you, and just kind of see where does that butterfly effect continue to grow. And that's really how I've pictured, doing this podcast. I might not have the most viral platform, but I know how to build the site and to build out like the editing and we use the software, and to see how does that impact my circles and my social circles and those surrounding ones. So to be able to overlap social circles and to be able to see that change, and like literally everything you said, thank you so much. Before I forget, and before we wrap things up, I want to loop back to something you had said about hope, and specifically hope is more like an action. That's kind of something that we had discussed previously during our brainstorm, and you mentioned hope just a little bit ago. I love that idea so much, and I feel like the more that we tap into the idea of hope is something that we can continue to build and to foster, but it also takes some like actionable steps sometimes to be able to see where does this hope take us. I just really appreciated that insight from you. And so thank you for sharing that.
Hope is kind of like this passive, like, I hope things change. Well, okay, what are you actively doing to make that change happen? And we all do it in different ways. And sometimes it's just by being a good person and leading a good life and leading an open life and being tolerant and accepting. I always had a little bit of trouble with that word tolerance, like to tolerate differences. It's not just tolerating them, it's truly accepting them, that the differences are there and we're not carbon copies of each other and we're our unique beings, and you do you, as long as you're not harming anybody. And that golden rule is, so there's it's golden for a reason. I'm very fortunate, right, to be able to be in this position of retirement from a long career where I felt truly, truly satisfied. It was a privilege to be with little kids and to be with middle schoolers during the time of their transition to adulthood. And I felt very lucky all those years. Sometimes, at the end of a school day, I would just think, wow, what a day we just had. Just the exchange of ideas, a project that everybody was doing, the kind of dynamic in the class, and the way students were interacting. And that was really important. Like trying to remember who it was in my grad school that talked about building community in the classroom. How important it was that we all respected each other and were kind to each other within that space. Like you can't control what happens outside the classroom. You could pretend, but certainly your classroom environment could have a ripple effect on how students treated each other outside when you were their teacher in the front of the classroom, and hopefully not just in the front of the classroom. That's one of the things I really love doing was, and this, is having circles, not all the seats facing front. That in itself I learned when teaching 4-year-olds, because that's not how you teach 4-year-olds. They're not into that, and that they shouldn't be into that. And I wish that every classroom could have a Harkness table where there was an exchange of ideas around an oval table and it was just more free form and not triangulated to the teacher, right?
Mm. I genuinely appreciated being able to have that experience to
Yeah.
to break down those barriers, those social barriers in a sense, and to be like, we are peers, we are colleagues, we can work together, we can continue to build ideas and function together. Everything you said, thank you so much. And
Hilarious.
oh, well, I genuinely mean it. And I did give you a little bit of homework before the episode started. As folks who may have listened to podcasts before, I do love to wrap things up with a quote. And I've asked Elena to share a favorite quote, one that's on top of mind for her. So feel free, Elena, to share.
And partly in keeping with what our topic was going to be today, I did go back to Bell Hooks, and I have so many quotes of hers that we could have gone over and expounded upon. But I like this one: to build community requires vigilant awareness of the work we must continually do to undermine all the socialization that leads us to behave in ways that perpetuate domination. And I mean, that's one, she packs a punch. She just packs a punch.
Yeah.
And I just love that quote amongst many others. And maybe you'll work bell hooks into other podcasts. Can I add one more? Just because it's so perfect for what's going on right now. It's so timely. That one
Absolutely.
was too. One of the most vital ways we sustain ourselves is by building communities of resistance, places where we know we are not alone.
Oh my
Just like
gosh.
it's just like this is, and today I do want to add, and I feel kind of honored that we stumbled upon this date. I know we had changed the dates to meet, but today is International Women's Day in many countries across the globe, and women are doing special things today. I am going to a gathering after we finish celebrating women, and I just very much appreciate us landing here together on this day to commemorate March 8th, 2026 as International Women's Day.
I'm so glad that you mentioned that too, because it definitely feels like today to celebrate and to be able to come together. And I really appreciate the incredible women in society, in our lives, and more so specifically, so grateful to be able to celebrate you and to be able to have you on the podcast and be able to just open up and share about the last 20 years and a little highlight reel of everything that we've discussed. And truly, those quotes also are just absolutely perfect to be able to encapsulate everything that we talked about. So genuinely, thank you so much, Elena, for being
Thank
here.
you for making, I mean, you made this space for us both to be reflective and to be heartfelt. And I just love this whole idea of your podcast. And I hope I get invited back again to talk about the winning of the Outdoor Equity Fund grant for Valle Vista Elementary School. We're going to get almost 300 students out riding bicycles, and it's going to be so much fun. So look for us in the spring when you come back to New Mexico.
Definitely will do. And you most certainly, I would love to have you back. And thank you again for being here. And thanks to everybody who has listened. I'm very excited for this episode's companion sticker coming out. I've done a little bit of sketches and everything already for it, but I'm trying to see what direction I want to lean with it. I know Elena has shared that she loves postcards. I love postcards. And so now we are sending postcards to each other. So it might be a little hint of what that might be, but well, thanks y'all so much for listening today and truly for being here, sharing the space with us. It has meant so much, not only to create this space, to have this space with Elena, but also to each of the listeners. I just genuinely appreciate you taking time out of your day to have a little listen to our conversation today. So thank you. And if you haven't already, check out our socials on Instagram and TikTok at Queerly Overthinking, and check out the Patreon, search for Queerly Overthinking there. That's where the episode stickers will be available and a monthly note coming out as well. I genuinely love being able to create in different mediums, both this audio, visual, but then stickers and a written, kind of spans the breadth a little bit of all the various mediums that I've explored, and it's fun to be able to do that here. Also, if you haven't already, check out www.queerlyoverthinking.com for all the other information available there. But thank you again so much for being here, and I will see you next time.